More rewards, more savings. With American Express Business Gold, earn up to $395 back in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select shipping, food delivery, and retail subscription merchants, including the $155 Walmart Plus monthly membership credit and $240 flexible business credit. Enjoy the benefits of membership with the Amex Business Gold Card. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Carlos Sainz topped the timesheets on the second day of pre-season testing in Bahrain. But could Williams really be a threat in the lead group, or has title favourite McLaren strengthened its position? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me with all the latest from Thursday in Bahrain are John Noble and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, let's come to you first. Are you, like me, feeling a bit stupid about mocking Aston Martin for their tyre choice, given we had a fair bit of rain today, certainly by Bahrain standards?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more fool us. And I think Aston Martin were rightly feeling very smug about the onset of the wet weather. Not enough to make it worth 3 sets of intermediates, I would argue. But look, I think we can afford them this little victory.
Absolutely, yeah. Tip of the hat to Aston Martin, although the track never got particularly wet. But it is a little bit odd, isn't it, John? We all come here because it's warm conditions, it's not cold like in Barcelona, and it's European winter conditions.
It is quite interesting because you can see in the paddock who's been prepared and done their prep before coming here and who hasn't, because those that have are in nice warm jackets or have hoodies or jumpers, and those that haven't are wandering around shivering like mad in T-shirts. So, I can't recall Bahrain being like this before, and it's not actually much warmer than if we were testing at Silverstone or anything, which is very, very strange.
I heard someone who has been here for a very long time say that this is the coldest it's been and the first bit of rain that they can recall since F1's been going here. Obviously, pre-season testing is at a slightly different time, but nonetheless, it is a bit bizarre. And it's caught out so many people this weekend that when I was at Alex Albon's media session earlier, Alex had, not only did he have a long sleeve jacket on, he had basically pulled the end of the sleeves up over all the way over his hands and was holding them really, really close. He did not seem to appreciate that Williams had made that media session take place outdoors. But the way Alex had his sleeves, it was like looking at like a kid that has been dressed up extra warm because I haven't realised how cold it is outside.
I must admit, one of the stints I did trackside was the last 50 minutes or so, and it was all right while I was out there, but I came back in and I had to quickly write something, so I came into the media centre and I had to wait maybe 5 minutes for the hands to warm up. It was that cold.
I had that earlier.
Where's your coat, Ed?
It's behind me. I'm not relying purely on the waterproof skin for this one. I do have a coat with me, but it's kind of, I mean, for me, I'm well insulated anyway. So
I knew you were going to say that.
Exactly, it's true.
That phrase popped into my head as when you said waterproof skin. I thought, I bet he says he's well insulated as well.
So it's all right when I go out, but yeah, coming back in, I could feel that the cold had penetrated the hands, which was not ideal. So yeah, just need a few minutes to limber up. But anyway, that was unusual today. It meant the morning was a little bit patchy, but the running got going a little bit as the day went on. So let's get into the traditional test day podcast starter, which is Mark Hughes' analysis of progress from his timing bunker many thousands of miles away. He's got everything you need to know about the lap times today, in particular the all-important long-run pace.
So on the second day of pre-season testing, there's a shape beginning to emerge. It's still a little hazy around the edges in terms of the competitive order, but yeah, there was was a moment late in the afternoon where McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes all did very comparable race simulations. They did a 2-stop race simulation divided up into roughly equal length of stints of about 51 laps, given a sort of the race will be 57 laps, but in the time available they divided the stints up into a total of 51 laps. And looking at that, and it's just a numbers simulation, it's not necessarily definitive, but looking at that, Lando Norris would have won by 12 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, with Kimi Antonelli a further 2 seconds behind the Ferrari. That's just on the numbers. There's a bit of a complication in that. McLaren ran the C1 tyre in the final stint, whereas the other two ran the C2 tyre. And he was a lot faster. His advantage over them was a lot more on that tyre than had been the case when he was on the same tyres in the first 2 stints. So we may that advantage may be exaggerated by a tyre compound advantage. Difficult to know. The other complicating factor, of course, is that Red Bull wasn't on the same programme at all. It was spent a lot of time in the garage after Liam Lawson, who was in the car all day, suffered an issue with the water pressure, and that sort of, they were constantly on the back foot after that. So it still doesn't look like we've seen a comparable level of performance from that car as well as from the other 3 teams. But yeah, that's how it's looking so far. You may have noticed Carlos Sainz, who was heading the headline times for Williams, but Williams was the first and probably so far the only team to really do some proper full-on performance running because they wanted to give Carlos Sainz, who's not going to be in the car again until the first race in Melbourne, so a realistic feel, a representative feel for how it's going to be. So they took a bit of fuel out and give him a bit of engine mode, and he very impressively went P1, marginally ahead of the time set by the Ferraris. And the sessions between the morning and the afternoon looked more evenly matched today than yesterday. And in those teams that had different drivers in each session, the times were remarkably similar, actually. And Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc did virtually the same time, as did several others. So it would look as outside the top 4 teams, still the top 4 teams, and outside of there, Williams and Alpine, just as yesterday, look to be the most competitive of the midfield. The others are all in various states of works in progress. Aston Martin are still doing a lot of testing of components, a lot of sweeps still doing aero rakes very late into the day. Haas is concentrating on just getting the operation of the team gelling because a lot of new people there, got 2 new drivers, so they're just doing long ones. They've just loaded the cars with fuel and they're just getting them to run and run and run. So there's no representative Haas team. The Racing Bulls and the Saubers, just as yesterday, looked a little difficult to handle, didn't look very balanced. So I think probably day 3, we might see a more representative picture from Aston and Haas at the very least. And it's all quite intriguing, but a somewhat clearer picture than the first day.
Great stuff as always there from Mark Hughes. And before we talk more testing, a quick reminder that the Race Members Club has a special 90% off your first month offer. Loads of content there. For example, today I recorded a trackside impressions video that went up earlier, and Scott for some reason explained our drive to the track while we were wandering in.
I did a trackside analysis video as well, but yeah, sure, make me the subject of mockery.
There's so much going up on Patreon, I didn't even know you'd done that.
Exactly. There is a video from a giant talking potato, and there's a video from a giant talking beetroot head. So
Absolutely, yeah. So if you are going to go to our Patreon page, do brace yourselves, because there is a chance you will see
giant talking vegetables.
Our massive faces, which can be a little bit off-putting. But we like to think the content is good. So we're putting loads up there. And
yeah, I've enjoyed doing them. It's nice to be able to do something like that that's a little bit more, it's bite-sized, but it's not sort of like a 30, 40-second thing that you see get chucked out on social media or something like that. It's a few minutes of kind of digesting our thoughts from trackside, and there'll be other ways I'm sure that we can kind of populate the Patreon over the final day as well, because I know on this podcast, Ed, we're going to be focusing on what we've learned today on day 2, but just looking ahead very briefly to day 3, I can't wait, because there's going to be that's when all the final lessons start to fall into place.
Absolutely, the business end of the test, but there's still lots to talk about today.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places, between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Noah Chestnut from The Athletic. If you're into games and sports, pay attention. I'm going to give you 4 sports terms. You tell me the common thread. Ready? Axle, loop, Lutz, Salchow. That's axle, loop, Lutz, Salchow. This one's like medium hard. The answer is figure skating jumps. Now, what if I gave you 16 different terms and you figure out how they come together into 4 different groups? If you're up for the challenge, you'll want to check out Connections Sports Edition. It's a new daily game for sports fans. There'll be some that are going to stump you, some that make you laugh, and some that remind you when you were a kid watching sports for the first time. Connections Sports Edition. To play today's puzzle, go to theathletic.com/connections.
Right, Scott, as Mark Hughes explained, the McLaren long run looked impressive. So what did Andrea Stella have to say about it?
He was very happy not to hide how happy he was. He's obviously, with things like the difference in tyres that we used, that's not been jumped on by Andrea to kind of disguise how McLaren's looking. It's not if everybody else had been on the same tyre, it looks very different. The picture's very different. It's not hiding behind any kind of like forced limitations in the car or anything like that. Like saying, we're unhappy with this. He explained very nicely the rear instability that Lando Norris had talked about earlier in the day, that he'd felt when he drove in the car on day 1. And actually, Andrea said that was Norris's first bit of feedback out of the car after that ominous long run, that the rear was sliding around. But as Stella explained it, you expect a certain amount of rear instability in Bahrain because of the nature of the track and the layout. That kind of comes with being quick at a circuit like this. And he actually thinks that they have made an improvement in this area relative to last year. So it's not something that's of any great concern. It sounds like it's within the parameters of what they would have expected from the car development and being here and testing here. He did admit that there is the caveat that applies to everybody in terms of what their feedback is on the cars this week, which is that the conditions are so cool. We were joking about them earlier, but it's 15, 20 degrees colder on ambient temperatures, and track temperature is going to be even greater, the difference presumably to sometimes when you're running during the day, especially here. So that's not being overlooked. I think they won't rush to jump to conclusions, but very, very satisfied and confident in the McLaren camp. That was the vibe I got. But John, you were there with Andrea as well. So.
Yeah, I agree, because sometimes you throw these, because obviously we'd seen Mark's analysis and we'd heard from teams about this McLaren run, which pitches them ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes, and you throw these bits of information to a team boss just to see what their first response is. Some of them will kind of deny or pretend they don't know what you're talking about. Some will play down the whole thing and give some excuse or reasons to why it's not that impressive. But Andrea explained it all Very logical explanation, very detailed in terms of the tyres. The tyres have been different, the temperatures, where things are at, how ultimately everything needs to be taken with a pinch of salt because of the conditions we've had this weekend. But equally, no hint of trouble, no hint of concern, just the general feeling that this test is a pure engineering exercise, which it ultimately is.
Yeah, and I have to say, in terms of that rear instability that Norris talked about, there were hints of it yesterday, but I didn't really think much of it. So I thought, well, I'll go out today and I'll look again for it. And again, you get the occasional hint of it, particularly I was watching at turn 10. You can go up the drag racing control tower and stand above the track, which gives you quite a good view. And you could see just a tiny bit of it, but it all looked usable. There was nothing that I thought looked particularly worrying. You talk about the rear end being a bit weak. It's like you turn in and it's like you're on ball bearings and the rear just goes, no, over that. And it's nothing like that. So I think McLaren still looking very decent so far. And they seem quite assured, again, with the position as they were at the launch, as they've been throughout, really. So this is a team that seems fairly comfortable with its favourite status. But let's talk about Ferrari now, John, because Lewis Hamilton spoke at length today. That's the first time we heard from him in such depth since that press conference last week when he seemed to be having a lovely time. So he's had a couple of half days in the Ferrari now. How's he feeling?
Better today than yesterday. I think yesterday probably left him scratching his head a little bit. I think there was confusion over the kind of variations of times between the morning and the afternoon. So Lewis had looked quick in the morning, but as the day wore on, obviously everyone shifted ahead of him. He ended up quite a way down compared to Leclerc, and instantly, the thoughts must be going through your head about what is he not on top of the car as much as Charles? Are things not clicking as much as he wanted? Today was much better. They worked on the car overnight. He's talked about every time he kind of pops out the car, he gives his feedback to the engineers, and when he gets back in again, changes have been made, things have been done, different ways of running things. So he's talked about this month he's had with Ferrari being almost perfect. It couldn't have gone better. He says even the bad things that have happened, so even Barcelona, the crash, that setback when he put the SF23 into the wall, this is all part of an important learning process he's got to go through. He can't make improvements if he doesn't find limits, doesn't go over limits, doesn't find problems, doesn't find issues he needs to address. So I think today he was really, really bubbly. It was a TV broadcaster session. It was 19 minutes. And we know in the past that if Lewis isn't in the mood to talk, these things can, last 3-4 minutes and one sentence answers. But, long answers on life at Ferrari and the passion and photographers and John Elkann discussing books today and all this sort of thing. It was a happy, smiley Lewis who's still well aware there's a long journey to go and he's not at the limits yet. But I think he feels encouraged, and I'm going to be quite intrigued to see what long run he can do tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it is that big question mark now over where exactly is he performance-wise, and we won't get a firm answer here just because he's still on a slightly steeper learning curve than the other front-running drivers because of the adaptation. Plus, it'll be difficult to know how much of a direct comparison you can make from day 2 to day 3, and also even those that are doing runs on the same day as him, unless we end up with a fortunate situation like we had today, because what we had today with the Leclerc, Antonelli, Norris comparison, that sometimes doesn't happen. You don't get a single race run at the right time, let alone 2 or 3. So you might not know that, but we'll get a picture of where Hamilton's at, and that's where it'll be key, because we have a better performance indicator from him today. I think we've got a better idea of him being comfortable in the car today than on day 1. I think that went for both drivers because that car definitely looked more connected, front and rear, than it did yesterday. And I think what's important at the moment for Hamilton at this point, at the end of day 2, is to have that level of kind of positive messaging, to have his enthusiasm not be dimmed at all by any kind of harsh reality dawning at this test. I think it's about as good a place as he could have hoped to have been 2 days in. And it might be that the performance-wise, it will consolidate everything he's feeling. And actually, he'll be absolutely bang on it, there or thereabouts, maybe even a bit quicker. It could also be that he still has a bit of time to find. But I think if that is the case, he won't be surprised. He has talked very, very honestly about the scale of the learning curve that he's on. He already feels that they've covered a huge amount of ground in a short amount of time. And I did, for me, the most interesting thing was the way he phrased it as, every day being significant of the last month, and everything that has happened had to happen, and even the shunt at Barcelona in the 23 car. So yeah, I just felt it was very illuminating, Lewis, that spoke to the broadcasters today.
I think overall, I've still got a few slight question marks over the Ferrari. I think it's clearly quick, and it's up there, but still, some of that understeer we talked about, that seems to become a tiny bit more persistent. Not a massive problem, but again, just wondering if that's something they're trying to work on. So, yeah, I just sort of say things are looking decent at Ferrari, but not stunning so far. And again, very, very provisional data are testing, watching trackside, all the usual caveats, but just they need that little half step tomorrow. I'd be interested in seeing that before saying Ferrari could be, say, an outright favourite.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, because I don't think it's had the moment that any of the other three cars have had where it really makes you think that's doing that really well. And it might not need that. It might be better to have the car that's at 99% all of the time, whereas others have a great peak and then fall away from it sometimes. But the McLaren has clearly sort of made a great consistent impression over the course of 2 days now. And the Red Bull was a bit difficult to judge today, and the Ferrari are all sort of taking turns of impressing. But yeah, I don't feel there's been a proper standout moment from the Ferrari yet, but maybe that'll come on day 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Mercedes that you mentioned in passing there has been looking reasonable. Again, it's not at that McLaren level, but it's looked quite usable, consistent. They seem fairly happy there at Mercedes, don't they, from what we've heard. But again, with that usual caveat, it's cold, and the Mercedes, historically, when it's cooler, has worked quite well. So we don't know if there's that capriciousness in the car just waiting to burst out and catch them all out.
Yeah, unless you've got a back-to-back, unless we can, go to parallel universe and Bahrain's 40 degrees centigrade and we do those long runs again, you're not going to find out the comparisons. But I think Mercedes are pretty happy with the place they're in at the moment. That run today, Kimi Antonelli did in the afternoon, was pretty much on a par, 1 to 2 seconds compared to Leclerc behind the McLaren, which I think, considering where Mercedes has come from, is quite encouraging. And we must also not forget, this was Antonelli's first race sim on the current tyres. He's done tons of TPC testing. He's done race simulations and stuff in the past, but they're all on the kind of Pirelli Academy tyres. It's a different compound. It's not the real thing. So today was that first time to do it. So he's exploring, how do you approach looking after the tyres? There are moments he pushed too hard, moments he went off track. So it's all part of this learning process. So I think to have come through all of that and to have ended up on a par with what Leclerc was doing on a similar tyre strategy, because obviously Norris was slightly offset in how he picked those second compounds. But I think they will be quite happy and a good springboard. And I'm intrigued to see what George can do in that car, just to get a proper benchmark of where things are stacking up between Mercedes and Ferrari.
The encouraging thing for Antonelli is on that long run, or those long runs, you could see he was learning from the way he used up the tyres and just from the odd mistake here and there. So it's a steep learning curve for him still, but I said on the preview podcast to this test I wanted to see Antonelli from trackside. I've seen quite a lot of him, and I still like what I see in terms of the way he's working. He's not just someone who's just quick and raw and just always sort of being caught out by the car, but you can see him learning that, applying that, changing. So quite positive test for him and gently encouraging for Mercedes. Okay, let's talk about today's pace setter, Williams. Carlos Sainz, of course, topping the times. Scott, you were a little bit more Team Alpine in the midfield battle yesterday, while I leaned more in the direction of Team Williams. Has Carlos Sainz and his pace today changed your mind?
I don't think the 1 lap pace and the fact that he's quickest has, because I think however I felt about Williams yesterday, I'd look at that time today and go, well, that's clearly a low fuel run. Nobody's expecting the Williams to be the fastest team. I actually saw a little bit more this morning trackside of what you were talking about yesterday, which I think I did say on the podcast, like I'd sort of seen glimpses of, but I wasn't really sure what I was seeing from the Williams yesterday.
And it's always pot luck what you see, what corners you're at, and what run plans. So
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes quite often our notes sort of match, but sometimes just because of what you see something a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly. So I was already quite encouraged by what I saw from the Williams this morning. And then I spoke to a couple of people down at Williams, including Alex Albon, and heard what he had to say, despite him not being in the car today. He was very encouraged. There's obviously a big change there, which we haven't really talked about so far this week, but with the new rear suspension that they have on that, where they're back on spec now with Mercedes. They've got the latest spec rear end, and last year they were using the year-old one. So it's a fundamental mechanical change. So there is a handling difference, and the way the car responds is different. There's also obviously other Williams car changes, aerodynamic changes and stuff to try and have slightly better handling characteristics. But when you change things like the rear suspension and everything associated with that, one of the consequences is it's slightly different in terms of the software and how you make adjustments on the rear. It doesn't sound like, because I asked Albon if that meant that they had a bit more, he had a bit more at his disposal now in the cockpit in terms of what he could change. And he says it's not that. He was quite happy with the toolkit that you had in the car with them before, but it's just how you make the changes are different. So you're kind of learning that as well. So there's balance shifts, there's other shifts too. But both drivers, and this is where I think that lap time comes in, because I think it bears it out, were optimistic that the peak of this car is good. There's a little bit that's still catching them out here and there. Albon basically confirmed our respective trackside observations, because what I saw this morning did tally with what you were reporting yesterday. So he said that's being ironed out, and he thinks that could come tomorrow in the third day, because Sainz had the car all day long, it sounded like, from what Albon was saying, it would be easier to make these changes overnight rather than play about with it too much like during the day. So I'm interested to see what Williams do on day 3, and obviously as others take the fuel out, as Williams do longer runs, where they shake out. But it's that kind of bigger picture that encourages me about Williams actually more than that P1 lap time. I think it's difficult because they're certainly not, under the radar being fastest, and it's kind of difficult when they've gone P1 on day 2 to be a dark horse as well. But I would say if you look at where they were versus the start of testing and at the back end of last year, I think that just about gives them dark horse status, sort of in a wider context. And I think they could establish themselves at the sharp end of the midfield. Absolutely.
And I think also an interesting thing Andrea Stella said tonight, discussing the top 4 teams and where things stack up. He says, no, there could be a different language in Formula 1 this year. We could be talking about top 5, top 6. So, which suggests Williams, potentially Alpine, have actually made a step from the midfield and close into the top 4. So I think they're keeping an eye out on where this midfield teams have made this leap. And even if the Williams was a bit lighter today than everyone else, it's still got to be a good car to
do the time,
do that lap time. You don't just take the fuel out in a bad car and then do what Carlos has done today. So there is clearly some pace there. We're not pretending it's on a par yet with, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, definite. But I think there's some promise and potential there.
Hamilton noticed it as well. He said that today, that the Williams look very quick. So it's turning heads. Just being P1 doesn't mean everything, but yeah, it means at least something.
I think what I liked from the Williams over, say, the Alpines look pretty good. But for example, watching at turn 10, in the Williams, Carlos Sainz could just get on the brakes, get the car rotated through the corner. It's just a nice progressive rotation through the corner you go. In the Alpine, it's just a tiny bit more disconnected in that it just sort of, you see it almost rotating in stages, which makes it sound horrendous, but it's not massively. But just you look at it and you just see a little bit more evidence of a slight limitation. But I think the Alpine is pretty good. As for where the midfield is, I'm sort of sticking with the top 4 in the midfield paradigm, but I don't know what that gap's going to be. And if that gap gets much closer, then it is effectively going to be no gap at all. The midfield battle looks quite tight generally as well, but yeah, Williams looking good, the Alpine a bit disconnected. The Aston Martin looks a little bit like the Williams in terms of being quite nice and smooth at times, but I'm not sure is as quick. It doesn't look to have that little edge, but we'll see a little bit more tomorrow of those. And John, let's just jump forward back to that conventional lead group, because Red Bull is fairly quiet for them today. Liam Lawson managed 91 laps, didn't do the full programme. So what's the latest there?
Yeah, I think consistent. The car seems to have found some consistency, but Lawson's race sim was interrupted by that water leak. So, which is, I think, as soon as you're out of kilter on a race run, it kind of compromises the final time. So it didn't end up on the pace of the top three, McLaren, then the Ferrari and Mercedes. So I don't think we've seen the full potential yet from the Red Bull. They're still working on the car. We get Max Verstappen in the car tomorrow, which will be interesting to see what he can unleash. And I think there's also talk of potentially some upgrades, new bits on that car tomorrow. So are we going to see the real RB21? I'm not expecting anything radically different, but is this the final configuration that they'll take to Melbourne with Max Verstappen in the car? And then we'll be able to pitch where that car ends up tomorrow evening, hopefully, on a race run against head-to-head with McLaren.
Yeah, I had some sympathy for Lawson because Red Bull opted to give him the whole day in the car as partly because obviously he's adapting so much, and it was a good opportunity for him. But between the issues with the weather and the issues with the car, the gremlins as he described them, I think he only managed 91 laps, which is a bit short of what you'd expect from someone who gets the car to themselves for a full day. And that's his test done now. He's now going into his first full season in F1, and at the same time his first season as a Red Bull racing driver. So I don't feel like he will be as prepared for that as he could be. But the initial bit of feedback from both driver and team is actually quite good. I think Pierre Vacher, the technical director, said that Lawson's feedback is close to Max's, which is obviously good for them. They feel that Lawson's handled it quite well, and Lawson himself feels that he's at least in a good place with the car. I don't feel like he's chasing too much, but we don't have much of a reference like lap time wise, performance wise for him. He was doing long runs obviously when he did get the run in today, so it's a little bit murky for him. He's another driver that's on a very steep learning curve, and he's probably not made quite as much progress along it as he would have liked to at this test.
Yeah, I was hoping today to be able to follow up what I'd said yesterday about the Red Bull, just having signs of that handling imbalance, and I wasn't quite sure whether that was just a thing of experimentation or whether it indicates there's still a problem, but I had an unerring ability to miss the Red Bull today, so I didn't really see it trackside.
Both of us. I think we
not because we were looking the other way, but just you go in, you're in the paddock sometimes you're out there, but I just never saw it running.
I think between the two of us, we were trackside for about 3 hours today, and those 3 hours genuinely coincided with the entire time Lawson was in the garage. Like, neither of us saw a single lap from the Red Bull. I think I clocked maybe an installation lap or something like that, but that was it.
Yeah, I didn't see it at all. I was waiting for it, but every now and again I was tricked into thinking, that's the Racing Bulls car. But so no more on that. I'm sure the Red Bull's doing fine. I mean, I asked Max Verstappen today about it. He was quite non-committal, but he was sort of gently positive. He said the car was decent, but I don't feel Max Verstappen gave it a glowing endorsement, and I don't feel he hinted there was anything problem. I think Verstappen's still in a little bit just seeing where we're going here. I'm not trying to put words into his mouth or sort down Red Bull, but certainly for me, there's still some questions to answer there.
Yeah, but I think Max was in a bit of a cheeky mood today. He was a bit non-committal about everything. He was batting questions away, and he was asked about F175 and the booze, and said, "Oh, I'm deaf. I didn't hear anything." And joking about his relationship with Lando and how they had a fight in the pub recently and whose fault it was and getting thrown out. So he was in a mood, one of those funny Max Verstappen moods where he's just batting everything away and joking about everything. So
it was quite funny, yeah.
It was amusing, but not very useful for getting any proper insight on where things are stacking. So, and I don't know if is that a sign of supreme confidence and he's happy where they're at, or is it a sign of, I'm a bit bored because I'm not in the car today and I don't know why I'm here?
It sounds a lot like a driver sat in a press conference they don't want to be in at a track that they're not driving at on that day. So he's had half a day in the car. He said what he had to say yesterday, didn't he? So yeah, there's quite a lot on riding on the final day for Red Bull. They obviously need to catch up a little bit of lost mileage from Lawson's day. Max needs to get a proper feel for the car. And I think we sort of hinted at this in advance of this week, but Max is not the type. He's not shy about coming forwards, is he? So if he doesn't like that car, I think we will get an idea of it tomorrow. But yeah, right now I don't think there are any major ills. It's just it's not we don't have a proper reference for it. So we just have to wait a little bit to be a bit more committed in what we think of the car.
I think also, as Verstappen said, the car was pretty good in Bahrain last year. Bahrain's not the perfect circuit for evaluating those qualities. So I think even if things go really well tomorrow, there'll still be just that thing in the back of his mind. Let's see what happens when we get to Australia. And again,
it's an ideal Red Bull track, isn't it, Bahrain? It's like the Red Bull Ring as well.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I don't think we're saying Red Bull in trouble or something, but there's just still a few little blanks to fill in, and I'm looking forward to seeing Max Verstappen, see him from trackside tomorrow. Hopefully won't dodge him relentlessly. Scott, just quickly, I wanted to finish on Sauber because I was equivocal yesterday, given they did make improvements early on, having looked pretty terrible. And then everything today tells me it's the most troubled car. What have you seen?
I want to try and be constructive in what I say. But I don't feel like that car has made much of a step in terms of in relative terms. It might be much better than last year's car. I hope that car is running heavy, because right now when I see limitations in other midfield cars, it feels like there's a reason for it. You know, it's either one of the rookies that are in the car, or they're on one of the hardest compounds, or like with the Haas where you can see it's super heavy. With the Sauber, I do just fear it's limited. I've had that feeling yesterday. I think I said that on the podcast yesterday. I have no reason to think otherwise today. It feels like it is where it is in the times because that's where the car is, rather than like because of its run plan specifically. So I'm a little bit worried. And we also know that while there's quite a big effort has gone into that car, it sounds under the surface, like it hasn't changed dramatically. And that team would, I think, it can't afford to write this year off and just focus on 26, because that's another team that's got a lot to prove about how much it can develop a car. But at the same time, it can't really afford to take anything away from this year that it could put on 26, because it's a massive year as the first year as Audi. I don't know. I don't believe they definitely wouldn't have phoned this car in. I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but I do fear it's looking a bit limited, and it's limited in the way that you might expect it to be for the slowest car last year in a situation like Sauber's in. It's just not the ideal place to be, or set of circumstances to be in, rather, when you're trying to develop your way out of being the worst team in F1, which they were last year because they finished last in the championship. So I don't know. Are you less? How equivocal are you feeling about Sauber?
I'm a bit more concerned about them today, in that yesterday they seemed to have a bit of a problem, improved the car a bit, and then they've not really gone any further, and the car seemed to be a bit all over the place, particularly with Bortoletto today. So, yeah, not looking stunning. I mean, I don't think they're 2019 Williams sort of trouble, but you kind of... But you don't need
to be now.
Yeah, exactly. If I had to pick a 10th ranked car this moment, it would be the Sauber. But
looks like the only thing from last year that's been upgraded for the Sauber are the two drivers, and they're not even driving this year. But I bumped into Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu at this test. I saw Bottas yesterday when he was leaving the track, and I bumped into Zhou and had a brief chat with him today in the middle of the paddock. And they both seem to be better for being out of that environment. Not for any ill towards the team or the personnel or anything like that, but just that just race after race pounding that you go through when you're driving a car at the back. And they just seem quite free, to be honest. Their shoulders look a bit lighter than they did last year.
Yeah, well, I spoke to Valtteri. I think he said he's going to miss the racing. So there's still the itch is still there. So, but I do wonder for someone like that if the desire to race is greater than the hatred of being around at the back and not making progress. I think they don't know where that line starts and ends.
I think for Zhou it was slightly different, because obviously he went through quite a mental pummeling last year, especially when he was very uncomfortable with the car. I feel like if he could have the car he felt he had in the last couple of races, where he seemed a bit more confident, that would have been different. But yeah, I think he seems like it's going to do him the world of good mentally to have a bit of time off. I don't think Gabriel Bortoletto as a rookie is going to regret being in F1, because he's a rookie and it's his first F1 seat, and he'll probably love it because it's his first F1 car. But I think for drivers in a different circumstance, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world to end up off the grid than it is to be driving that Sauber. But we could be wrong. Maybe that Sauber's actually much better in the midfield. Maybe we'll find out more tomorrow.
Well, yeah, it's all still to be seen, isn't it? I must admit, I spoke to Valtteri Bottas. I think he's still very keen to come back next year, Valtteri.
He seems very keen to talk to us, basically.
He's very keen.
Yeah, we'll have a chat to him. Well, he's a friend of the show, isn't he?
He is.
Indeed, an integral part of the show. But yeah, no Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner this year. We were going to have Carlos Sainz in Sympathy Corner because we did have in their live show provisionally that it might become
and
for
now
him.
the idiot's gone P1 in testing. So
well, exactly. Maybe it's going to be
Carlos Sainz Celebration Corner?
Nico Hülkenberg Sympathy Corner could be coming up. Who knows? But anyway, we're going to leave it there because we've got to go because it's quite late. But we will be back tomorrow with our wrap of the test to run through everything. We'll have our idea of what the final order is, and I'm sure we're going to learn loads tomorrow. So thanks, John. Thanks, Scott. And thanks, Mark Hughes, for his input earlier. As I said, one more day of testing, so stay with us for everything you need to know from F1 pre-season.
The Athletic.